Most of you have already realized that names, while they are like any other word, random syllables, have meaning, just like any other word in any language. Whenever your parents name you, they're not just choosing random syllables, they're choosing random syllables that have been given a meaning by our ancestors. Depending on what language, what culture, and what year you live in, it could turn out that your name means something special. Although chances are that your parents only chose it because it sounds nice, and any meaning associated with it was probably more intentional centuries or a long time ago. So I was actually not too surprised, but actually at the same time very surprised when I found out that most of the protagonists in all the main series Pokemon games don't have just random names associated with them, but actually they have secret hidden meanings most of the time. Now, most of you, if you play Pokemon games, know that when you start a Pokemon game, you have the option to name the protagonist whatever you want. Some of you may already be aware that in the game code, as well as when the games were being developed, each of the characters for each of the games has a name associated with them, just in order to tell them apart. And while these names don't actually mean anything outside of the manga and the anime, in some cases, it's interesting to note that the video game protagonists were given specific names for specific reasons. Starting on with Gen 1, this will be the briefest because their names actually don't have hidden meanings. They are actually very obvious. Generation 1 only had one protagonist, named Red. He was given that name simply because of the original games being called Red and Green, or Red and Blue in Japan. Obviously, these colors represent the three types of your starters, and red represents fire. Also, don't forget that there was no female protagonist at that time, because Leaf technically was not introduced until Generation 3 with the remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green, but since her name literally means leaf, just like red literally means red, I didn't see much point in talking about it too much. But for those of you who don't know, Leaf's manga counterpart is Green in the West, but her name was originally Blue in Japan. Just like how the rival that you most call Blue in the West was actually called Green in Japan. Then Gen 2 came around, and while it only started out with a male protagonist just like Gen 1, they quickly changed that when Crystal came out. However, in the original Gold and Silver, your main character's designated name is Ethan, also known as Gold in some manga. Ethan's Japanese name is Hibiki, which represents echo or sound in its meaning. While the meanings aren't always the same among all the languages that the game is released in, then the meanings usually have a correlation, and not only that, but the meaning isn't always literal. Sometimes it's wordplay, sometimes it's just a literal meaning, like red was, and sometimes it requires a knowledge of Japanese or other Asian characters that need to be translated in a specific way. The kanji of the Japanese word sometimes needs to be read in a specific way, so it isn't always obvious unless you're familiar with the language why that name means what it means. So Ethan's Japanese name Hibiki means echo or sound, while its English name is a reference to music as well because a rumored author of one of the biblical psalms. And as you can see, all of his other names in the other languages have similar meanings. When Crystal came out, they added a female protagonist option for the first time, but she did not receive any unique name, and her name was designated Chris in every single language, because it's short for Crystal. She was replaced in Gen 4, the remakes Heart Gold Soul Silver, by Lyra. Lyra, obviously in English, is based on lyre, which is another musical instrument, and her Japanese name Kotone is also a reference to the sound that the instrument koto makes. If we put Ethan and Lyra together as a pair, it is obvious that both of their names intentionally are a reference to both music, musical instruments, and echoes. So you could say that the Johto protagonists have a sound theme going in their names. I'm not sure why, although it'd be interesting for any of you to find out or interpret the intention behind making them represent music, because I have not gone as far as discovering that. In Gen 3, the male protagonist is named Brendan, also known as Ruby in the manga. Brendan in English comes from the word brave, while in Japanese his name is Yuki, which also means bravery, but is also based on the word yu, which can also mean distant. The female protagonist, also known as Sapphire, is simply called Mei in English. Her Japanese name Haruka means a spring flower, just like the name May is a month of spring, but it can also mean distant in Japanese, just like Yu. So Yuki and Haruka have references to being distant, while at the same time having unrelated names, with one being Brave and one being Spring. Then Gen 4 introduced the Sinnoh protagonist. The male, Lucas, comes from lux or lucis, which is Latin for light, and his Japanese name Koki also means brightness. So that's obvious. And the female protagonist, Dawn, is a reference to the sun rising in the morning, the dawn, which also represents light. Her Japanese name, Hikari, also means light. So the obvious theme here between Lucas and Dawn, Koki and Hikari, is that they both represent light. It's also interesting to note that a certain way to look at Lucas's Japanese name is that it is based on the letters in the Japanese word for diamond, as Lucas and Dawn were introduced in the games Diamond and Pearl. Then Gen 5 introduced the Unova region, and the protagonist names are Hilbert and Hilda. Hilbert and Hilda both come from the German word meaning battle or fight or war. Their Japanese names are also just as similar, Hilbert being called Toya and Hilda being called Touko. And both of these are based on the Japanese word to, meaning fight. So the theme of Black and White obviously was war. But why they chose this is still beyond me, and I hope someone can figure that out. Then their sequels, Black 2 and White 2, came about, and they had a really clever way of going about these names as well. The male protagonist is named Nate, and the female protagonist is named Rosa. Nate's Japanese name is Kyohei, and Rosa's Japanese name is Mei. The Japanese names are based on the word Kyomei, where Kyomei can be split into Kyohei for the male and Mei for the female. In one way, you could actually say that putting their names together, Kyohei and Mei, forms the word Kyomei, like a portmanteau. And Kyomei in Japanese means resonance, while their English names do the exact same thing as Kyomei. If you put Rosa in front of Nate, you get Rosa-nate, or the word resonate, in a sense. It's very similar. That's why both of their names are based on the word resonate in every language. Resonance is also a reference to possibly N's name, but I might get back to that in a future video. I really can't wait to find out why they were given these themed names. What does resonance have to do with the Black 2 White 2 story? Then Gen 6 came about, and they did something especially unique that they haven't done before or after, in that in Japan the characters' names were not Japanese names but English names. The male Calum, or Calm, from the French, as he was called in Japan, means calm. And the female Serena was also called Serena in Japan. And obviously Calum is calm in French, and Serena means serene in many languages. You don't even have to translate it to figure that one out. Now, Calum and Serena are commonly called Xavier and Yvonne because those names start with X and Y, just like the games they're released in. And that's what they were called in the pre-release of the games. When the games were first being showed in advertisements, people thought they would be called Xavier and Yvonne. But it is also their names in the manga, specifically calling them just X and Y. But the obvious theme here is that calm and serene are synonyms. Calum and Serena both mean the same thing. Calm, serene. Then Gen 7 came about with Sun and Moon, and for the first time since Pokémon Red, they decided to go as close as possible to the game names when naming the protagonist, meaning the protagonists were called Sun and Moon, literally, in the pre-release of the games. But of course, their official names didn't remain just Sun and Moon, but similar names. The male is Elio, E-L-I-O, which means sun, because it's named after the god of the sun, Helios. And the female is named Selene, which is meaning moon, because it's named after the goddess of the moon, Selene. In Japan, the male is named Yo, which is short for Taiyo, which means sun. And the female is named Mizuki, which means beautiful moon. So the theme here actually is super obvious, super simple, nothing hidden. Obviously they're based on the sun and moon, and it's actually probably the easiest generation to interpret because it feels like there's no hidden meaning. It's just straight out sun and moon. However, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon also came out in Gen 7, but they did something different. They redesigned Elio and Selene with younger looking designs, even though they're technically still the same age. The new designs officially are still called Elio and Celine. They shouldn't have any other names officially, but because they're designed so differently, and in canon they are basically alternate versions of Elio and Celine taking place in like an alternate dimension in the multiverse, a different timeline if you will. Since that's the case, I don't mind calling them by Elio and Celine, but I technically prefer to call them by the names that was referenced to them in the pre-release of the games of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Before Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon were released, they were called in certain media in Japan Kouta and Koumi instead of Yo and Mizuki. With Kouta, if you interpret the kanji in a certain way, means big light, which could be a reference to the sun, and Koumi, if you interpret the kanji in a certain way, means beautiful light, which could be a reference to the moon. And their English pre-release names, before they were settled with Elio and Celine as well, were Ray, which is a reference to sun rays, and Ailey. Ailey was extremely difficult to pinpoint, but research shows that it is most likely based on the old Irish word for light. So Ray and Ailey both are reference to light. Not so much sun and moon in English, but specifically light, which is what the sun and moon are most known for. So the references and the links between all these names, the hidden meanings, seem to be making sense so far in this generation. Then Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee came up with some new protagonists that were loosely based on the Kanto trainers, but they are technically not Red and Leaf. The very young looking protagonists of Let's Go Pikachu, Let's Go Eevee are called Chase and Elaine. Chase is obviously a reference to running, and Elaine is most likely a reference to a road's lane. So both of them seem to have a theme of walking, running, basically going outside, because Let's Go is related to Pokemon Go, and it's just the theme. Their Japanese names are Kakeru, which is Japanese for dash, and Ayumi, which is Japanese for step. Both of them are a reference to progression and traveling, and basically running or walking in general, as is the theme of Let's Go. And finally, we reached Generation 8, the current generation, and the names of the protagonists are slightly obvious. The male is called Victor, and the female is called Gloria. Victor is obviously a reference to victory, and Gloria a reference to glory. As is the saying, when you go to war or something, you fight for victory and glory. Glory and victory. Seems very suitable for the game's Sword and Shield. However, Victor's Japanese name Masaru means surpass, and Gloria's Japanese name Yuri means excellent. So both of them are a reference to victory and glory as well, because he wants to surpass and she wants to be excellent. And it's also curious that if you put Masaru and Yuri's names together, they form a pun, but only in Japanese when read in the kanji, possibly a reference to championship, and I just find that extremely clever. So looking back, I'm still not 100% sure why Ethan and Lyra are based on music, why Lucas and Dawn are based on light, why Hilbert and Hilda are based on battle, why Nate and Rosa are based on resonance, and why Caleb and Serena are based on serenity. I enjoyed this research very much, and I enjoy these facts of random trivia as well. Most of you will probably find it completely useless, but it's just what I am into. So thanks again for joining me today in this discussion. Stay tuned for more videos like this. Next time I will probably be talking about the meanings of other characters such as rivals and gym leaders. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and support the channel by sharing with a friend, checking it out for more videos like this, and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Thanks again. I'll see you guys next time.